Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Valerie McKeehan, and before I get started on today's tutorial, my first course is coming out and signups are officially open. It is the Magic of Soft Pastel online course. This has been a long time coming. I am so excited to get to share this with you. It is going to be a 6-week live, interactive, immersive, deep dive course into the magic of soft pastel and soft pastel landscapes. So for me, when I discovered soft pastel and landscapes, it felt like coming home to myself. It has changed my life in so many ways. And once I was able to gain the technical know-how of putting pigment to paper, I've been able to find peace and calm and paint my feelings, materialize my memories into art. And having that expression has just changed my life. I want to share that with you. This course is going to be that. It is going to be a deep dive into the technical side of soft pastel because I want you to feel confident in painting so that you can bring these places that are important to you to life with joy. But even more than just the art instruction and the technical side of things, it has a focus on mindfulness, on tapping into your inner artist, on connecting with nature, materializing those feelings, and just coming alongside of you in this artistic journey. If you have been wanting to have a creative outlet to try something new, it's easy to kind of push that into the future and say, you know, I'll do that someday, or maybe in the future, I'll get to that. I don't have time right now. It's easy to put that creativity and maybe that longing that you have to try something or a creative outlet on the back burner. That's why I wanted to run this as a live course, because your time is now. There is no better time to try something new than in this experience with like-minded people in a supportive, encouraging environment to keep you accountable. Make yourself a priority, make your creativity a priority. It's going to be really, really good. I'm so excited. Spaces are limited just because I want to make sure that it's a great experience for everybody. And we're just going to have a great time discovering the magic of soft pastel, but again, just connecting with one another. You can read all of the details on my website at valeriemckeehan.com/course. I will also put a link in the description so that you can go there and check it out. I would love to see you there. So for today's tutorial, this painting you may have seen in the video about the magic of soft pastel. This was a wildflower field near my house. And we were driving past and my husband and I just pulled over because I wanted to get into this meadow and do some filming. And when I got there up close, to my absolute delight, there were these hot pink poppies just sort of dotted throughout the landscape, and they were just swaying in the breeze and the sunlight was hitting them, and it was just incredible. It was a wonderful moment. So I wanted to capture those poppies being the star of the show, having the sunlight hitting them. So I'm excited to paint this memory for you. Let's get started at the easel. I'm using a piece of
Pastelmat, and it is in this really nice sienna color. There's so much green in this scene, and when I have a lot of green, I like to either have an underpainting or a paper color that is warmer. I like oranges or pinks are a really nice way to underpaint greens. It just gives them a lot more life and just interest when there's a lot of green. Now for my underpainting, I am using a Derwent Inktense block. It looks like a pastel and feels like a pastel, but it's actually compressed ink. And I really like it because you can use it dry, but I'm going to be wetting it down with rubbing alcohol, and it will bring out the liquid ink and liquefy this pigment. Now, compositionally, I want to really get a nice receding going on. So have the grasses in the foreground and then recede back into the tree line. So to do that, I'm darkening the foreground of my scene. Now I'm taking my fan brush and some rubbing alcohol. I'm using 70% isopropyl alcohol and just liquefying that Inktense block. I'm using the fan brush to my advantage to get some really nice wispy, grassy kind of marks. Just speeding this process up a little bit here, blocking in my trees, and really just embracing that texture. And then here in the foreground, I want a lot of that texture just to look like the stems and just really reaching up there. Now I'm going back in with greens. I let this dry. I should say that. You can't tell because of the magic of video, but I did take some time to really let that dry, and it did take a few minutes. Now I'm adding in my sky with a nice warm blue. It was just the most beautiful sky that day, as you can see from the photo, just beautiful blue skies and white clouds. I'm starting to think about cutting into that tree and the shape that I want the tree to end up being. And now I'm really just lightly scumbling in that color. All of my layers, especially at the beginning of a painting, are all very light. Even if I am pretty certain of myself with the color, I like to just start light in the beginning because that always gives me room to layer, change my mind. So when you're starting a painting especially, just think light touch. Now this is a harder pastel. It is a new pastel, NU, and it is kind of a peachy pink color. And I'm using that just to add to the horizon. I'm going to be working a lot more on the sky a bit later in the painting, but I want to get my greens started. I'm going to be using a number of different greens. Some cooler greens, some warmer greens, some greens that are more saturated, greens that are more neutral, and all of these greens are just going to harmonize together to just really make a green scene come alive. I'm using a dark, warm olive color green to add into the tree, which was blue from my Inktense block. So I'm starting to add green there. I added some green into the distant tree line. Also bringing in that dark, warm green into my other trees and into the foreground as well. I'm going to be leaving a lot of texture in this foreground. And you'll see as the painting progresses how much texture I leave in, because I just really love how the pastel almost did a lot of the work for me in giving the impression of all of those stems and grasses. This is a harder pastel. It looks like the color of the Derwent block, but it's actually a harder pastel. This is a blue spruce pastel, and I've talked about it many times before. Unfortunately, these were discontinued, sold as individual sticks. So the Inktense block was one of my replacements, but I still just grab for that blue spruce pastel. I just love the color of it. Now with a different green, this is a Rembrandt dark green. I really love Rembrandt pastels. They are on the harder side, but they are really great, especially in the beginning of a painting when you're building up your layers. Since they're harder, they don't lay down a ton of pigment right away, so you can get those light, translucent layers with them. This is a cooler green. I'm looking at it to find a side to use. And now I'm lightening up the side of the tree that the light is hitting. Just very lightly going over that edge and then using my fingers to just soften it a bit. And I'll be cutting into this as well with more sky, but just being sure to keep a light touch. Now I'm going to bring some sun into my distant tree line there. Using that green, just again, very lightly. And then also adding it into the ground. It's good to use the same pastel in multiple places in the painting if you can, because it just gives a really nice color harmony to the entire piece. So when I have a pastel in my hand, I'm usually looking for other places where I could pop that in before I switch out my color. Now for the poppies, the star of the show, and I'm going to make some bold marks here and add those in. This is a Mount Vision pastel. It is from their red set, which I really love. It has beautiful reds and pinks in it. And my reference photo doesn't show any poppies in the distance, but again, for that color harmony, I just want to scumble in just the light impression of a few more poppies there in the distance. This will also help draw the eye back to the background, because if I just have those bright pink poppies in the foreground and I don't really carry that through, your eye has a tendency just to kind of get stuck there. But I want to take you on a visual journey back into the background, looking at the trees up in the sky. So this is just something I'm thinking about through the entire painting, is how can I take the viewer on this visual journey. This is a cooler green again that I'm lightly adding into the distance. One of the ways we can get that magic trick going to make it seem like you can just jump into a painting like Mary Poppins is using cooler colors in the distance. Cool colors will recede and the warmer colors will come forward. Also, lighter values will recede, and colors that are less saturated. Those are all just tricks to use to make a flat piece of paper look like it has depth and dimension. This orange Terry Ludwig pastel is very close to the sienna color of the Pastelmat. And so I like to, when I'm using a colored paper, I do like to sort of pick a pastel that is close to that paper, because I can go back in and add some of that texture to certain places. I love leaving some of the paper showing through. And so this just helps me be able to add more of that color in key places. And I really liked it there in the foreground. Continuing with an even lighter value green to give the effect of the sunshine. Very lightly. You can maybe tell by the sound of the pastel even, I am so just lightly grazing this surface because I want that translucent layering. Now I'm starting to bring in more sunshine. Adding that really nice warm green. Very nice and saturated. That also helps bring the eye up from the poppies because you get this just sunshiny, saturated green in the field. Lightly glazing that. A different green here. Adding that to some key spots. I'm keeping with the vertical strokes to give the effect of the grasses, but then I am turning my hand in certain areas there in the foreground to maybe make it look like there's some leaves. Just a variation of mark making. That's one of the really cool things about pastel, is that the pastel is your brush. So you can move it around and move your wrist to give different marks. And that's how we can really create impressions of shapes. Back to the sky, I have that harder pastel. Again, that peachy pink color that I'm adding closer to the horizon just to give some warmth with the blue. And then back to the blue, lightly going back over the harder pastel. This gives, again, just a really nice layering effect. Starting to carve into my tree and think about some places where the sky will be peeking through those leaves. I'm merging the colors together. Just continuing to lightly add pastel there to the sky. Coming back in with some of the orange, tweaking the shape of that tree. I actually end up changing that tree a bit. And you see me wipe off my finger here because I'm going to go ahead and blend in the sky with my finger. You definitely want to make sure you have a clean fingers when you do that, especially in the sky. I wanted to cover more of that orange paper in the sky and really blend these colors together. And now I'm using a light aqua color right there at the horizon. And I'm going to use this color to cut into the distant tree line and really just create those shapes in the trees. I want to make sure that they're interesting shapes, and then merging it up into the warmer blue. I mentioned in previous videos that the sky is such a dance. It's a push and a pull, and just adding lightly, blending it a little bit, making sure that you don't have those stripes in the sky, but just a really nice, smooth gradient. Cutting into the shapes of the trees. The edge of the pastel works really well for doing that. And this is a blue earth pastel that I'm using. They have a really nice, not square, but a squared off shape. And then back with the original blue color again, spending a lot of time here in the sky just to make sure I get that nice effect. And then adding more sky peeking through the leaves there, which are called sky holes. And sometimes I add those marks, but it can seem a little too contrasted with the trees sometimes. So I will knock those down with my finger a little bit. Adding even more sunshine just to the tips of those leaves where they would really be hitting the sun. Thinking about the different places in the trees that would be catching that light. And then I'm using a creamy pink, almost white, just to add that little cloud in the sky. I loved that in the reference photo. So for a finishing touch there in the sky. And now this was the peachy, harder pastel that I was using in the horizon of the sky. I'm just adding that into a few places here. That can be maybe dried grasses or little bits. Just, again, another way to add some of the interest to the green and break up all of that green shape. This was a lighter green that I'm using, a Terry Ludwig that I'm using on its side to get some grassy shapes cut in there to the shadow. A cooler green into the distance. Lots of greens, like I said, in this scene. But it's all of those greens working together that just really make the piece come alive. I'm using the pastel on the broad side, and then I'm using it more like drawing in this instance, just to add a few of those fun little details. That's a Giro pastel. Back to the cooler green. One of the things that I love so much about landscape painting is the ability to help somebody look at what I find to be so captivating. So we can use the colors and the way that we create a composition to really tell somebody, hey, look at this. This is beautiful. Now this is the lightest green that I will be using, and I'm just adding it there to the very distant field. Back again with more of the cooler green. It's helpful to squint your eyes. I do that a lot, or I step back and just make sure that there's nothing that is competing for attention. So that's where a lot of this push and pull comes from. I might put down a mark and then squint and think, okay, let me settle that down, or merge it with other parts of the grasses so that it has a lot of interest to it, but it doesn't necessarily detract from the part that I'm really trying to get you to notice. Now, here's a really fun part. I am taking my harder pastel, the blue spruce again, and I am just rolling it between my fingers to give the impression of the stems and sticks and twigs and fun little things there in the foreground. And now I'm bringing some sunlight onto the poppies. This is another harder new pastel. And I'm using a pretty hard pressure here because I want a nice juicy mark in those poppies where the sunlight is hitting. The key to making something look like the sun is hitting it is saturation. So I started with that really nice saturated pink, and to give a highlight, I'm not going to a white or something that's a light value but desaturated. It's a lighter value, but it definitely has that pink punch of saturation. Tweaking more of the sunlight in the trees, just very ever so gently. And this is where I tweak the tree a bit. It got kind of thick with pastel. Sorry for the jarring sound there of hitting the paper, but I wanted to brush off some of that pastel and then just tap my paper so that it would fall off. Pastel is actually more forgiving than you might think. You can brush things off and try again. Here I'm just adding more greens around the poppies, adjusting the shape very slightly, adding more of those drawn marks in there. I want to keep these so loose. I'm almost holding the pastel like it's about to fall out of my hand because you don't want those just straight lines. Going back to the tree that I was tweaking with more cooler green, adding a few spots of the orange in there to break up what would be some trunks in the tree. And now here I have a gorgeously yellow-green saturated. This is one of those punchy pastels. It's a Sennelier, so it's very buttery and soft, wonderful for some of these last marks. And I'm definitely getting to the end here. And I'm moving my hand around to get just some little flowery marks, varying my mark making. Up until now, I've been using a lot of vertical strokes in the grass, but for this, I just want those hints of tiny little fun things, little wildflowers. I want to give some nice green stems for my poppies. Back to that Sennelier, just for a beautiful pop of bright green that looks like a poppy bud there. A nice little surprise in the painting to discover. Adding these tiny little marks. These are the finishing marks, which are so small but so impactful. Switching back and forth with my Sennelier and then this beautiful warm Giraud pastel. I'm also thinking again about guiding the eye through the painting. You hit the pink poppies and then those little bits of yellow flowers. I'm tapping the pastel to get the stems on there. And this is how the painting ended up. Very textural. I especially love all of the little branchy marks and the poppies, of course, were the star of this one with those saturated, punchy pinks. They were just such a delight to see, and I love the fact that I could paint this painting and just give the feeling of being in that meadow. I really hope that you enjoyed, and if you're interested in purchasing this painting, feel free to send me an email at valerie@valeriemckeehan.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.